forge fire had gone cold 3 hours ago, but Sarah's hands were still moving. She was grinding the burr off a cracked hinge with a whetstone no wider than 2 fingers, crouched on the floor of the smithy, because the workbench had collapsed 6 months ago and Lord Karen Voss had not yet seen fit to replace it. The castle garrison had 14 hinges just like this one. She had repaired 11 of them tonight. The 12th had cracked along the weld, and she had spent the last 40 minutes trying to save it before admitting she could not, and she was on the 13th now, working by the orange glow of the banked coals because the oil lamps had run dry and no one had refilled them. She was not supposed to be the castle smith. The castle smith had been a man named Edric, broad as a wagon wheel, with 4 arms like knotted rope, and he had died of fever 2 winters past. She was supposed to be his apprentice. She had been his apprentice for 3 years before that, starting at 15 when her mother had traded her service to the Thornwall garrison in exchange for a debt the garrison commander had quietly agreed to forget. Now she was 22 and she ran the smithy alone, and she was paid an apprentice's wage because no one had bothered to change the ledger entry. She set down the 13th hinge and pressed the heels of both the palms against her eyes. The smithy smelled of coal dust and iron, and the faint sweetness of quenching oil. Outside, somewhere in the upper corridors of Thornwall Keep, she could hear boots on stone, too many of them, moving too fast in the wrong direction for the hour. She heard them before she understood them. The outer wall had fallen. She learned this from a guardsman who ran past the smithy door with blood sheeting from a gash above his ear, who did not stop when she called after him, who disappeared into the dark of the lower courtyard, still running. She learned the rest from the sound, the particular cacophony of a siege pushing through defenses that were no longer holding. Iron on iron, stone on stone. And underneath it all, a low rhythmic roar that she had only heard once before, at the border skirmish 3 summers ago, that she had been foolish enough to climb a watchtower to see. Wolves. Shifters. The kind that moved in coordinated formations and did not stop until the ground was cleared. Sarah grabbed the nearest thing that was both useful and portable, the leather roll of her smallest tools, needle files and punches, and the hand drill she had made herself from a broken crossbow bolt, and ran for the interior corridor. She found him in the passage behind the great hall. The man was massive, which was the first thing she registered, and then immediately not the most important thing, because the most important thing was that he was bleeding from 3 places simultaneously, and had apparently dragged himself to this particular stretch of stone wall by will alone, leaving a trail of it dark and continuous behind him on the flagstones. He was propped against the wall at an angle that suggested his legs had decided not to cooperate. His armor, black iron, northern forged, the kind that cost more than the smithy earned in a year, had been partially torn away, not unbuckled. Torn, the metal itself had been pulled apart. Only one thing moved like that. Only one kind of wolf could open iron like that. The man's eyes opened when she crouched in front of him. They were silver, not grey. Silver, like the inside of a blade that had been ground to true edge, catching light from some source she could not identify. She had her tool roll. That was all she had. She opened it. The smallest needle file was tapered to a point fine enough to reach into mechanism gaps. She had a spool of copper binding wire wound tight, the kind used to anchor forge-welded joins before the flux set. She had a punch, a drill, 2 chisels, and a small jar of pine resin flux that she used for brazing. She looked at his wounds. She looked at her tools. Copper wire would not hold in living tissue. She knew enough from watching Edric treat cut horses to know that foreign metal in a wound bred infection, and shifter tissue she had been told by every garrison healer who had ever come through Thornwall rejected foreign material with a ferocity that made infection look gentle. The wounds needed binding, organic binding, something the body would read as self. She had her hair. It was the most ordinary fact about her, the one thing people commented on without contempt because it was genuinely strange. Too thick, too dark, growing faster than it had any reason to. Edric used to say it was the iron dust getting into her blood and building something in there. She had worn it in a braid at her nape since she was 17, mostly to keep it out of the forge, and it hung now past her shoulder blades, heavy and dense as rope. She pulled the braid over her shoulder, took her flush-cut nippers, and cut a thick section from beneath the wrapped leather tie. The man watched her do it. She separated the strands without looking at him. 3 hairs twisted together, then 3 more twisted around that, the same motion she used to make binding cord for flux joints. The result was thin, but it did not break when she pulled it between her fingers. She threaded it through the eye of her finest punch, a poor substitute for a needle, but it would serve, she began. The first pass of the improvised thread through the edge of the deepest wound made the man's jaw clamp so tight she heard his molars creak. He did not make another sound. His silver eyes fixed on the wall across the corridor and stayed there, unfocused, the way a person stares at nothing when they are using all available concentration to stay conscious. She worked quickly. She was good at fine work. 3 years learning to repair watch spring latches and mechanism locks, and the hairline cracks in decorative ironwork had made her hands steadier than most surgeons she had seen, and she had seen a few come through Thornwall. The 8th stitch brought something she did not expect, a warmth, not the warmth of blood which she was already covered in. This was different, originating not from the wound but from her own fingers, traveling up through her wrists, her forearms. Like holding her hands above the forge on a cold morning, except the forge was inside her chest, and it had just been lit. Her wolf moved. She almost dropped the punch. She had not felt her wolf in 4 years, not since Lord Karen had brought in a pack assessor, who had declared her ranking too low to register, her shift too suppressed to measure, and had recommended she be assigned to non-combat garrison function indefinitely. She had been 19. The wolf had gone quiet after that, the way a candle goes quiet when you cup your hand around the flame, not extinguished, but contained so completely it might as well be. She placed the 9th stitch. The warmth deepened. The man spoke for the first time. His voice was low, roughened from pain or from something older than pain, and it moved through the corridor the way forge heat moves, in waves, invisible, undeniable. "What are you using my hair?" she said without pausing. "Don't move." He was quiet for a moment. "You know what you're doing to us." "I know what I'm doing to the wound," she said. "I don't know what you mean by us." The corridor shook. Somewhere above them, something structural gave way. Plaster dust sifted down from the ceiling and settled on his dark hair. "Keep going," he said. She kept going. By the 14th stitch, she could feel his heartbeat through the thread. Not metaphorically. Her fingers registered it as a faint rhythmic resistance, as if the wire hair connection between needle and wound had become a second pulse running parallel to her own. Her wolf was at the surface of her skin. She could feel it pressing outward like a hand against a window from the wrong side. She tied off the last knot on the deepest wound and moved to the second. The warmth between them was a steady pressure now, not uncomfortable, not overwhelming, but undeniable in the way that forge heat is undeniable. You can turn away from it, but the air knows where it is. She was 11 stitches into the second wound when Boots arrived behind her. 3 sets. She did not turn around. "What is that woman doing?" "Stitching him." A different voice. "Get her away from. Leave her." The wounded man's voice cut across both of them, and, despite the blood loss and the stone floor and the situation in its entirety, his voice carried the particular authority of someone who had never once in their life been second-guessed and saw no reason to start. "She finishes." The Boots went quiet. She finished, 22 stitches across 2 wounds. The third was shallower. She closed it in 9, 31 total. She tied the last knot, bit the trailing wire hair close, and sat back on her heels. A drop of blood from her own punctured thumb, the needle punch had slipped on the 27th pass, fell onto the man's forearm where it crossed his chest. Where it landed, the skin flickered, a brief, pale light silver blue, like a struck flint in the dark. It lasted 3 seconds and faded. The silence in the corridor was complete. The man looked at her. His silver eyes were fully focused now, the unfocused discipline of pain management gone, and what had replaced it was something she did not have a word for immediately. It took her a moment to land on it. Recognition, not of her specifically. Recognition of something about her that he understood and she didn't. "Come here," he said. She was still holding the punch and the trailing end of her improvised suture cord. "I'm already here. You're welcome, by the way." Something moved across his expression that was not quite amusement, but was adjacent to it. He pushed himself upright against the wall with the careful deliberateness of someone cataloguing which parts of their body are and are not currently reliable. "What's your name?" "Sarah Maddox. I'm the castle smith." He looked at her hands, the calluses, the burn scars along the inside of her forearms from flying sparks, the black lines of forge grime in the creases of her knuckles that soap and water had never fully shifted. He looked at them for longer than was comfortable. "Who hurt your arm?" he said, and his voice had changed register slightly. Still quiet, still controlled, but underneath it, something new, like pressure building in a bellows. She glanced at the long burn scar along her left forearm, not a smithy accident. Lord Karen's son had done that 3 winters ago with a heated rod pulled from the fire because she had refused to spend a night in a room where she had not chosen to be. She had been 19, she had never told anyone. "Old injury," she said, "occupational hazard." His eyes did not move from hers. "That's a held rod burn. Horizontal, deliberate." She said nothing. He said, "What is your name again?" "I told you, Sarah." He said it differently this time, as if he was learning the shape of it. "I am Davin Ashford, Alpha of the Northern Alliance." She had heard of the Northern Alliance. Everyone who lived within 2 days of the border had heard of the Northern Alliance. It was the largest pack coalition in the territory, 7 packs operating under single command, and the man who commanded it had been described to her once by a traveling merchant as the kind of wolf that makes other alphas remember how to be afraid. She had pictured someone older, harder, more visibly frightening. He did not look frightened by anything. That part was accurate. "The siege," she said. "Are my people contained? The incursion is isolated to the eastern courtyard. My wolves have it." He paused. "Sarah." She met his eyes. The silver in them had shifted, deepened, like lake water when the light changed. She became aware, in the slow and unavoidable way that cold becomes aware of fire, that the warmth between them had not faded when she stopped stitching. It was still there. It had become ambient. Background heat. The kind you stopped noticing until you moved and felt the air beyond its edge. "You know what a bond is," he said. It was not a question. "I know the theory," she said carefully. I'm not ranked. The assessor said I didn't have enough wolf to bond." "The assessor was wrong," Davin said, "and we need to move. But when this is over, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about what you just did." "I closed your wounds," she said, "with what I had available." "With yourself," he said. "There is a difference, and I think part of you knows it." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. She wasn't sure why. His fingers closed around hers and the warmth detonated. Not painfully, but completely. It crashed through her chest and her wolf slammed against the inside of her ribs so hard she gasped, and the sound that came from somewhere deep in her chest was nothing she recognized. Low and resonant and entirely animal. "Bond," he said, the single word simple and enormous and irrevocable, and she understood suddenly that it was not a threat or a demand. It was a report, a statement of existing fact, the way you would say the sky is dark or the forge is hot. "That's not possible," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "It is possible," he said. "It has happened. I can feel 31 threads between us, and I don't think either of us knew that was the upper limit until tonight." She was the castle smith of Thornwall. She repaired hinges in the dark and ate after the garrison had cleared the mess table and slept in the back room of the smithy because it was the warmest place in the keep that no one else wanted. She was not ranked. She did not have a wolf officially. She was not supposed to be in this corridor, and the Alpha of the Northern Alliance was not supposed to be looking at her like that. His eyes did not move from her face. She picked up her tool roll and stood up. Her hands were steady. "We should move," she said. He stood. The movement should not have been possible. He had lost enough blood to fill the quench bucket twice over, but he stood without staggering, and the only evidence of effort was the slight compression around his eyes. "After you," he said. "And Sarah?" She had already started walking. "What?" "You are not going back to the smithy." She kept walking. The inner hall smelled of cedar smoke and tallow, and the close warm smell of too many bodies in a heated space. Every wolf in the room turned when they entered. She felt their attention land on her the way she felt heat from an open furnace, a physical pressure. She was covered in his blood. Her braid was cut short and uneven on one side. She was wearing her forge apron over a work tunic that had seen better days approximately 3 years ago. No one moved. The keep's garrison healer, a woman named Tova, whose name Sarah knew from supply requisitions, crossed the room in 12 steps, took one look at the stitches and stopped. "What did you use?" Tova asked. She was bending close, her fingers hovering over the first closed wound without touching. "Hair binding. 3-strand twist, drawn through a needle punch. Your hair." "Yes." Tova reached out and pressed 2 fingertips very lightly against the nearest stitch. She withdrew them as if something had answered her back. "These are bonded," Tova said. Her voice had gone careful, the voice of a person choosing their words in a room full of people they trust only somewhat. This is not a standard wound closure. Each thread is anchored to something organic, and it's accepting the anchor. This is a soul bind. She looked at Sarah. "Did you know?" "I knew the standard thread wouldn't hold shifter tissue," Sarah said. "I used what I had, you used yourself." Tova shook her head, not in condemnation, but in the specific bewilderment of a healer who has seen a great many things and is being shown a new one. 31 stitches, 31 bonds. I've seen single soul binds in the old texts. 3 is considered significant. There is no framework for 31. Davin, from behind her, "Then we'll build one." His voice carried no surprise, none at all. As if 31 soul bonds was merely a parameter that required acknowledgement and then management, the same as any other unexpected variable in a campaign that had already produced several. He settled beside her on the hearth bench, not across from her, beside her, with the same casual deliberateness she was beginning to understand was simply how he occupied space. He was not a man who accidentally touched. His knee settled against hers. The warmth between them pulsed once, a slow, deep beat, like a forge taking its first breath of morning. "You are from Thornwall," he said, "born and raised, but your rank is suppressed." She looked at the fire. "Officially, I don't have one. Your wolf has been dormant how long? 4 years." He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him thinking, not the content of the thought, but its shape. The way you feel the shape of a hammer blow through the anvil before the sound catches up. "The bond woke it," he said. "It's been waking since the 8th stitch," she said, before she could decide whether to admit it. "I thought I was imagining it. You weren't." He turned his head to look at her, and his silver eyes were very close, and the firelight sat in them in layers. "You have never imagined what your wolf was. You simply believed someone else's measurement of it." She looked at her hands, the burned scars, the iron grime, the tiny puncture marks along her forefinger from 31 passes of a needle punch. "I was told," she said carefully, "by someone with credentials and official sanction, that my wolf was too suppressed to function. Assessors measure what is active," Davin said. "They have no tools for what is dormant. The suppression was done to you deliberately, or am I reading the wrong thing into that scar?" She did not answer. His hand moved to hers, the one with the burn. His thumb pressed flat against the scar and stayed there. Not moving, just present. The warmth of the bond pooled under his touch like copper going liquid. "Who?" he said. "One word. It doesn't matter. It matters to me." He did not push. That was the thing she noticed. He said it, and then he held the space, and he did not push. She had never encountered that combination before in someone who could have pushed and had the standing to do it. Lord Karen's son, she said. Pettier Karen. I was 19. I told no one. The firelight in Davin's eyes went very still. Right, he said quietly. All right. She became aware, a moment later, that every wolf within 20 feet had shifted subtly, not moved, but oriented, the way a room of wolves orients when their alpha's attention has locked onto something. A collective physical response, like a weather change. She picked up the edge of her apron and looked at the blood stiffening in the fabric. I need to clean up, she said, and I need to go back to the smithy. There are 11 hinges still in the repair queue, and if the siege damaged the eastern gate, the fittings on the main portcullis will need. You're not going back to the smithy, he said, still quiet, still absolutely certain. You can't just, she started. I can, he said, and then, before she could respond to that, but I'm not saying it as a command. I'm saying it because you have been sleeping in a smithy and eating garrison leftovers for how long, and there are people inside these walls who hurt you and called it nothing, and I am telling you it is not nothing, Sarah. None of it is nothing, and you are not going back to that room. She stared at him. Where exactly, she said very carefully. Do you expect me to go? He met her eyes. With me when we leave for the northern keep. With me. He paused, not because of the bond, though the bond is real and we'll need to address it, but because I looked at your hands and your arms and your face and the way you moved in that corridor, and I would like very much to know what you could build if you were building for yourself instead of repairing other people's broken things. Her wolf pushed against the inside of her chest, so hard her ribs ached. I'm a garrison smith, she said. I fix things. That's what I do. Then fix things, he said, in a forge with a proper workbench. She almost laughed. She didn't, because laughing felt dangerous at the moment, like the first crack in a dam. Once it started, she was not sure it would stop, but the corner of her mouth moved. Your workbench collapsed, he said, 6 months ago. And Lord Karen did not replace it. Lord Karen did not notice. Something moved through his expression, not anger at her, for her. She was learning the difference, and it was not a small difference. The siege cleared in 2 days. The attacking pack, a rogue faction from the contested borderlands, pulled back to the east after sustaining losses that were, by all accounts, educational. Davin's wolves moved through the keep like water through a cracked foundation, efficient and total, and by the second morning Thornwall was functional and secure, and the only evidence of the incursion was a section of eastern wall under emergency repair and a great hall that smelled strongly of everyone having been in it for 48 consecutive hours. Sarah spent those 2 days in the great hall working alongside Tova and repairing things. She could not stop herself. It was reflexive. She fixed the broken bracket on the hall doors. She repinned the hinge on the buttery entrance. She spent 3 hours on the portcullis mechanism because she had been right about the damage, and the garrison smith's instinct was apparently not something that turned off during a political realignment. Davin found her on the second afternoon with her arm inside the portcullis housing up to the elbow, manually resetting a sheared locking pin. He crouched beside her. He had the patience of someone who had commanded things for long enough to understand that forcing a timeline usually broke whatever you were trying to fix. Show me, he said. She looked at him. He was not dressed for a great hall. Traveling clothes, plain, quality, but undecorated. He had the manner of someone who found ceremony useful in its proper context and irrelevant outside it. Show you what? She said, the mechanism. She showed him. She explained the locking pin system, the way the portcullis weight counterbalanced against the winch, why the shear happened where it did and not 3 inches over. She explained the metallurgy. The original iron was a northern alloy, higher carbon than the local stock, harder but more brittle under lateral stress. She explained how she would fix it properly versus how she was fixing it now. She talked for 11 minutes without stopping. When she pulled her arm out of the housing and looked at him, he was not looking at the portcullis. What? She said. Your voice changes when you talk about the work, he said. She looked back at the mechanism. That's not a particularly. It opens up. You talk faster and your hands move. He paused. You've been very careful all day to take up as little space as possible. You talk about the forge and you take up your actual amount of space. She did not have an answer for that. Sarah, he said. Yes, when we get to the northern keep you will have a forge. He said it the same way he said everything. Not a promise, not a question, a statement of how things were going to be. A proper one, with a working bench, whatever tools you want, whatever materials. He looked at her hands. Not a garrison smithy where you fix other people's things by candlelight after everyone else is asleep. A working forge where you make what you want to make. Her throat closed. She had an image, sudden and clear, of what that would look like. A high-ceilinged space. Good airflow, a bench at the right height. An anvil with a true flat face, not the Thornwall anvil with its scarred and pitted surface that introduced inconsistencies into everything she made. The smell of good coal and flux and her own work. I can't be your whatever you're suggesting, she said. Her voice was level. I'm not ranked. I don't have a wolf. I'm a garrison smith from a border keep. You have 31 bonds woven through me with thread made from your own body, he said. The healer has no framework for what that means. The elders have no framework. I have no framework. But I know what it is. He held her gaze. And Thornwall was wrong about your wolf, the assessor. Was measuring dormancy as absence, Davin said. Your wolf has been suppressed for 4 years by accumulated pressure from people who needed you small, because you were useful to them small. That is not a ranking deficiency. That is deliberate diminishment. He paused. And it is over. The words settled somewhere behind her sternum and stayed there warm and heavy. She stood, wiped her hands on her apron and said, The locking pin will hold until we get to a proper forge. Good, he said. Then, let's talk about what you're proposing. They talked. For 3 hours, sitting in the corner of the great hall while the garrison reorganized around them, Davin laid out what the northern keep was, who lived there, what the political landscape looked like. He was direct in a way that she appreciated, not softening things, not performing reassurance, but handing her the information and letting her hold it. He told her about the bond. 31 soul bonds were, as far as he or Tova or anyone in his council knew, without precedent. A single bond was rare. 3 was spoken of in old records as something extraordinary. 31 meant something that the language they had for it had not caught up to yet. He told her that some of the northern packs would not like it. An unranked wolf, a garrison smith, a woman from a border keep with no lineage and no fighting credentials. They would see her as a liability or a curiosity. He told her that he did not care what they saw her as. He did not say it with bravado. He said it with the same matter-of-fact certainty he used for everything, as if it were simply a fact about the world that had been established and required no defense. She told him about Petia Karen. She had not planned to. It came out in the middle of a longer conversation about the keep's garrison, structure, and her role in it, and once it had come out she kept going, because he was listening the way no one had ever listened to her, which was to say, completely, without waiting for her to finish so he could respond, without the thin attention of someone who has already decided what they think. His stillness when she finished was the kind that comes from control, not indifference. He's still here, she said. Petia, he's in the East Wing. I know, Davin said. He won't be for long. She did not ask what that meant. She thought she knew, and she thought she was all right with it. They left Thornwall on the 3rd morning. She rode in the supply section of the convoy because she had never been on a horse and had declined Davin's offer of his own mount with a firmness that surprised them both. The convoy moved north through hill country that slowly broadened into the open flat of the Northern Territories, and she sat in the supply wagon with her tool roll in her lap and watched the landscape change. The northern keep was built into a highland ridge, stacked stone and sod-insulated walls that had been engineered for the cold, not the aesthetic. It was functional and enormous and looked exactly like what it was, the center of a working pack alliance, not a decorative court. She climbed down from the wagon on stiff legs and stood in the lower yard looking up at it. Davin appeared beside her. She was learning his particular way of arriving, always from the left, always at a pace that gave her time to register his approach before he was next to her. She was beginning to understand, careful about her, not protective in the smothering way she had come to expect from the men who had tried to be. Careful. There was a difference, and it mattered. "It's not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Something with more towers." He looked at the keep. "We had towers. They were impractical. Who took them down?" "I did." He glanced at her. "The heating bills alone." She laughed. She had been afraid it would crack something open, laughing. But it didn't. It just came out like a heat snap from a forge, quick, real, dissipating cleanly. The first week was disorientation of a very specific kind. She was given rooms in the keep's interior, an actual room with an actual door that locked from the inside with a key that was given to her and no one else. She stood in the center of it for a long time on the first night, just holding the key. There was a forge. It was in the lower yard, purpose-built, with a double-flue chimney and a stone hearth that had been laid by someone who understood the difference between a decorative fireplace and a working forge. The bench was at a height that suited her. The anvil face was true. She dragged a straight edge across it the first morning and found no variance. There were coal bins and flux stores and a rack of tongs in 4 sizes and a post vise that could have held a carriage wheel. There were tools she did not recognize immediately, which meant they were specialized, which meant someone had stocked this forge with attention and thought. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. Davin was behind her. She knew it the same way she had learned to know everything about him. Through the bond, a warmth at her back that was now as constant as her own heartbeat, and through the specific quality of the silence he made. "Is it enough?" he said. She walked to the anvil and ran her hand along the face of it. Clean iron, well seasoned, a slight warmth from the morning sun through the yard door. She picked up the nearest tong, tested the hinge, felt the spring tension. "Where did you get the V-groove tongs?" she said, "from the smith at Ashford Ridge." She was retiring. "I bought her entire rack. The V-groove is for drawing down round stock." "I know." She turned to face him. He was standing in the forge doorway with his arms loose at his sides and his silver eyes watching her, and she felt the 31 threads between them hum, a sound she felt rather than heard. "I'm going to cry," she said, without meaning to say it. "That's all right," he said. She did. Not quietly, the proper kind, the kind that had been waiting for years, the kind that comes up from somewhere that has been compressed for a long time and finally has enough room to move. She cried for the workbench that had been broken for 6 months, and the oil lamps that ran dry, and the burn scar, and the 4 years of a wolf pressed down into nothing, and the 19-year-old girl who had told no one. Davin held her through it. He put his arms around her and stood like the anvil, solid, braced, going nowhere, and she pressed her face into his chest and let it run out. When it was done, she pulled back and looked at the forge and said, "I'm going to make something. The finest thing I've ever made, but I need time." "Take it," he said. She looked at him. "I should tell you about the bond. I could feel when I was stitching, I could feel what it was doing, what I was doing. I didn't stop." "I know," he said. "I felt that too. I chose it," she said. "Even before I knew what it was, something in me chose it." "So did I," he said. "Every time you placed a stitch and I could have shifted and thrown you across the room and I didn't. You were bleeding out. I could have managed it," he said, and the way he said it was perfectly level, and she believed him. She turned back to the forge. She had work to do. The Northern Keep had a council of 12, alphas and ranked betas representing each pack in the alliance, and they received her with the precise mixture of wariness and calculation that Davin had described. She had been prepared. She sat in the council chamber in borrowed clothes that fit her and met 12 sets of appraising eyes and said very little, because she had spent 4 years invisible and she knew how to read a room from the periphery. One of the council, a woman called Edra Voss, who served as Davon's territorial advisor, pulled her aside afterward. Edra was sharp-featured and economical with her words and smelled like ink and cold weather. She reminded Sarah of a well-maintained blade, not decorative, not showy, simply very good at its function. "You need to understand something," Edra said. "There are people on that council who will try to test you. Not directly. They'll do it through small things. The wrong chair at a meeting, an invitation that arrives too late, a request that comes through the wrong channel. It's subtle and it's consistent and it's designed to make you feel like you're in the wrong room." "I've been in the wrong room my entire life," Sarah said. Edra looked at her. A real look, not the assessing variety, something more like recognition. "There's a man on the council," Edra said. "Renwick Duor. He's been positioning his niece as a potential bondmate for Davon for 2 years. He's smart and he's patient, and he's connected to 3 of the other seats. He will not move against you openly. How will he move against me? By making you doubt whether you belong here." Sarah thought about 31 stitches made in the dark with improvised tools and her own hair. "That'll be harder than he thinks," she said. Edra's mouth moved, not quite a smile, close. Renwick Duor arrived at her forge on the 4th day, under the pretext of inspecting the Alliance's metalwork inventory. He was a thin man of about 50, impeccably mannered, with the particular kind of courtesy that functions as a weapon. He examined the forge with the careful attention of an auditor and asked questions about her training and lineage and previous commission work with the polished interest of someone who has no intention of being satisfied by the answers. He noted eventually that his niece, Emmeline, currently at the Pack Academy, had trained formally in metallurgy for 2 years. A wonderful education, the academy. Sarah was fitting a new striking face to a cross-peen hammer at the time. She did not look up. She said. "I'm sure your practical training has its merits," Renwick said. "Hands-on experience is irreplaceable." "It is," she agreed. She set the hammerhead and reached for her punch. "Renwick, what's the draw distance on this anvil's horn? I can't read the mark." He blinked. I beg your pardon? The horn. The tapered end. What's the length marked on the base?" He had no idea what she was talking about. That was evident. 22 centimeters, she said, having already measured it herself. Which is short for this size of anvil. Whoever specified it didn't account for drawing long, round stock. Not a problem for most applications. But I'll need a supplementary mandrel if I'm making anything over 60 centimeters. Just noting it for the inventory record. She looked up. "Thank you for coming by." Renwick left. Edra appeared at the forge door approximately 10 minutes later. "He went straight back to the council chamber," she said. "Good," Sarah said. "He can write it in the minutes that the smith knows what she's doing." Edra stood in the doorway for a moment. "Davon was right about you. What did he say? That you were the most competent person in Thornwall and you'd been made to act like the least." She paused. He wasn't wrong. The thing she made, the thing she had promised herself and him, took 11 days. She had not planned it out in advance. It began as an experiment with the V-groove tongs and a bar of northern iron, and it evolved the way the best work always evolved, by following the material, by listening to what it wanted to be. She worked in long stretches, eating briefly at the forge and sleeping in short intervals on the cot she'd dragged into the corner, because leaving felt like losing a thread. What she made was a clasp, not a simple one. The clasp was 12 centimeters across, hinged, meant to fasten a cloak at the throat. The surface was worked in a technique she had never been formally taught, a kind of repoussé drawing that used the V-groove tong and a rounded punch to raise the design from the inside of the metal, and the design that emerged was not planned. It was the 31 bonds. She didn't know it was until she looked at it whole on the 11th morning, the hinges set and the backplate finished, and saw the pattern of it. 31 lines that crossed and wound and doubled back on each other in a structure that was not random, that breathed, that, when she tilted it toward the forge light, shifted and moved like something that had not quite decided whether it was metal or something else. She stood alone in the forge and looked at it for a long time. The clasp was warm in a way that had nothing to do with the forge, warm the way the thread had been warm on the 22nd stitch in the dark corridor at Thornwall. Her wolf was awake now, fully awake for the first time in 4 years, present and enormous and white gold, pressing against the inside of her skin with a patience that told her it had been waiting a long time and was no longer interested in being patient. She felt the shift before she understood it was happening. It began in her hands, the ones that had made 31 stitches and held tools in the dark, and been burned and calloused and grimed and steadied across 3 years of solitary work. It moved up through her wrists, her arms, her spine, and the forge fire erupted, blazing white gold for one suspended moment, and then she was on all fours on the stone floor and the world had shifted registers entirely. Her wolf was large, larger than a ranked Omega wolf, larger than the alphas she had seen shift in the courtyard drills. The color of her coat was the particular shade of iron when it has been drawn to temperature and starts to glow. Not white, not gold, but the point between them where the metal is ready. She caught her reflection in the quench bucket's surface. She was enormous. She was extraordinary. She looked nothing like someone who had been told at 19 that she didn't have enough wolf to measure. The forge door opened. Davin stood in the frame. He had been 3 levels up in the keep. She knew this because the bond had told her, the constant low warmth of it calibrated to his location the way a compass needle knows north. He had felt the shift through the bond before she had managed it herself, and he had come. He looked at her. His silver eyes were blazing. His wolf was at the surface, pressing against the inside of him the way hers pressed against her, and the expression on his face, the alpha of the Northern Alliance, who had commanded 7 packs and walked through walls and been stitched back together on a stone floor, was something she had no word for. Not awe exactly, something past awe, like a person who has been holding a certain story of the world for a long time and has just been shown that the story was incomplete, and the truth is larger. He knelt. She padded toward him and pressed her head against his chest. His arms came around her neck and his face went into her fur, and she felt, through the 31 bonds, the particular kind of relief that comes when something that has been true for a very long time is finally allowed to be true out loud. By morning the keep knew. By noon the Alliance knew. By the following day, dispatches had gone to every pack seat in the territory. The Alpha's bondmate was a smith from Thornwall, unranked by false assessment, whose wolf had been suppressed by deliberate diminishment, and who had shifted for the first time in 4 years in a forge in the lower yard, and whose coat was the color of iron at temperature, and who had stitched 31 soul bonds into the Alpha's flesh with her own hair, and a needle punch in a dark corridor while the walls were coming down around them. Some of the Alliance heard that and called it a miracle. Some heard it and called it a threat. Renwick Dawes sat in his council seat and calculated. Edra came to Sarah 3 days after the shift. Renwick has been meeting with 2 of the outer pack representatives, Edra said, the ones with the longest standing concerns about the Alliance's succession stability. What's his argument? That a bond of this magnitude, 31 bonds to an unranked wolf, is a destabilizing factor, that it compromises Davin's independent judgment, that you are effectively a liability. Sarah set down the file she was holding. She thought about a dark corridor and a punch threaded with twisted hair and a man bleeding out on flagstones while the walls came down. "Call a council session," she said. Edra looked at her. "I beg your pardon." "Full council. All 12 seats tomorrow morning." She picked the file back up. "I have something to show them." She walked into the council chamber the next morning in clean clothes that fit her. She had let the keep's tailor adjust them properly to her actual measurements, and she carried the clasp wrapped in oilcloth on her palm. Every head turned. Renwick Dawes' face was composed and watchful. She unwrapped the clasp and set it on the council table in the center of the room where everyone could see it. "This is 31 bonds made visible," she said. "I made it. I made it the same way I made the bonds themselves, with what I had and with everything I am. She looked at Renwick. You've been arguing that the bond compromises his judgment. I'd like to suggest that a man whose mate stitched him back together in the dark with the hair off her own head and then built him that. She nodded at the clasp. From scratch in 11 days in a forge she'd never used before is not a man whose judgment has been compromised. Davin, at the head of the table, looked at the clasp. She watched him absorb it, the design, the lines of it, the 31 threads made metal. Sarah, he said quietly. It's a clasp, she said. For a cloak. I made it because I said I would make you something. He picked it up. The moment his fingers closed on it, the clasp warmed, the same warm pulse she had felt from the thread in the corridor, from the stitch on the 22nd pass, from the bond every morning since. It moved through the clasp and into his hand, and she felt it through the 31 threads like a struck string. The council chamber was very quiet. Davin stood. He was wearing a cloak, plain wool northern weight. He unfastened the plain iron hook at the throat and replaced it with the clasp. It settled against the fabric as if it had been measured for it, which, in every way that mattered, it had. Anyone, he said, who has remaining concerns about the bond's effect on my judgment is welcome to raise them now. He looked at Renwick specifically. I'm listening. Renwick Dorr did not raise his concerns. The marking ceremony was held at the end of that week, in the lower yard beside the forge, because Sarah had asked for it to be there, and Davin had simply said yes without asking why, which was, she was learning, a thing he did. He said yes without asking why when it was her preference, because he understood that she had spent years having her preferences asked about and then ignored, and he was not interested in performing the same pattern with better manners. She stood in the yard in the early evening with the forge breathing warm air out behind her, and her wolf present and awake under her skin, and he stood in front of her with the clasp glowing at his throat, and she tipped her head. He was careful. He always was, with her. The bite was sharp and immediate, and it translated, through the bond, into something she did not have words for. Not pain, not pleasure, but completion. The closing of a circuit she had not known was open, the sealing of a weld. She felt the mark settle, not just on her skin, but through every one of the 31 threads, a lock, a signature, an absolute. She pressed her forehead to his chest. I have one more thing to make, she said. His arms were around her, his chin rested on her hair. What? The workbench for the West Forge collapsed 6 months ago, she said. Someone should fix it. She felt him laugh, low and real and entirely without performance. The best sound she had heard in years. Make it yourself, he said. I'll make it myself, she said. But I'll need the specifications. I'll get you the specifications, he said. Tomorrow. She stayed. Petir Kairan was dealt with. She did not ask for details because she did not need them. And when she received the brief dispatch from Edra 3 weeks later, formal charges, pack tribunal, a specific reference to a garrison smith's formal testimony provided by 3 Thornwall soldiers, who had apparently had things to say for some time and simply required a framework in which to say them. She folded the paper in half and set it at the back of the forge bench and went back to work. The spring came slowly in the north, announcing itself in the margins of things, the meltwater in the lower yard drains, the particular quality of light at mid-morning that stopped being winter light and started being something less decided. She opened the forge doors wide for the first time in weeks and worked in the cross-flow of cold air and warm coal, and it was the best working condition she had ever had. She trained 2 young wolves from the Alliance's border settlements. Both of them told, at various points in their lives, that they were not strong enough or ranked enough for anything requiring precision. She showed them the V-groove tongs. She showed them draw and shoulder work. She showed them how to read iron the way you read a person, by what it gives under pressure and where it holds. She made things, not repairs, not patching and fixing and restoring, things that had not existed before, that she had drawn from the material by listening to it. The clasp had been first. After it came a set of 12 weight-balanced striking tools in graduating sizes that the council's archivist wept over. After that came a pair of fire irons for the great hall that every wolf who came through stopped to look at. After that, a locking mechanism for the Alliance's most critical supply vault that had 17 moving parts and could only be opened in a specific sequence that she had based on the bond pattern. Davin wore the clasp every day. On the last evening of spring, she was at the forge bench working on a small piece, a personal one. Private, not yet finished. She had been working on it for a week in the margins of other work. It was the smallest thing she had ever made. She was almost done. She heard his heartbeat before she heard his step. She always did now. He stood in the forge doorway and watched her work the way he had watched her since the beginning, with full and uncomplicated attention, the way a person looks at something they are not afraid to want. "What are you making?" he said. "Come and see." He crossed to the bench and stood behind her, and she tilted the piece toward the forge light. It was a small disc, iron, no larger than a coat button. On the face she had worked 3 shapes, 2 wolves, one large and dark, one smaller and bright, curled together at the center, and between them, barely raised from the surface, the beginnings of a third. Small, half-formed, the merest suggestion of a shape till them come into existence. Davin went very still. She took his hand and pressed it flat against her stomach. Not the piece of iron, her stomach, where for the past 2 weeks there had been a warmth running deeper than the bond. Something that was not her heartbeat and not his, but carried both of them in it. 3 pulses. Hers, his, and the third one, faint, new, a sound that had not existed before and did not yet have a name. His hand trembled. She covered it with hers. Outside the forge, the meltwater ran in the drains, and the yard was quiet, and somewhere in the ridge above the keep a wolf called out once to the evening and went silent. And in the forge, full of iron and coal and the smell of her own work, Sarah set down her tools, turned to face the man who had looked at her burn scars and called them nothing minor, and let the bond between them rest warm and complete and entirely enough.